Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar on options for project portfolio management with Jira. Thank you again for joining us. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items with everyone. When we have a large audience like this, we find it's best to keep everyone's microphones muted to keep away the barking dogs and passing sirens. But there is a Q&A feature here in our webinar platform that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And so throughout the webinar, you can type in your questions as you think of them. And we have time at the end of the webinar where we'll go over those questions. Also, just to let everyone know, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send an email to everyone who registered within a couple days, to letting them know where they can find an archive version of this video that they can rewatch or share with their colleagues, etc. We have an interesting, I think, webinar today. What we have is a panel of experts that we've assembled to discuss this topic. I'm the host. My name is Dave Rosenlund, and I'm going to introduce each one of our panelists to you here briefly. Joining us from Cprime, an Atlassian Platinum Solution Provider. In fact, all of the folks today who are joining us are from an Atlassian Platinum Solution Provider. Brandon is with Cprime. He has over 15 years of experience managing large application infrastructure and process development projects for numerous Fortune 500 companies. And he happens to have a lot of expertise in this particular area. So I know Brandon will contribute a lot of interesting thoughts on project portfolio management today. From London today is Gary Blower. Gary is with another Atlassian solution partner called Clearvision. Gary is a solution architect and client services manager at Clearvision, and he has a wide breadth of technical knowledge and hands-on experience helping organizations streamline and improve their software development life cycles. Welcome, Gary. And then from just north of where I am in Boston, we have Miles Faulkner up in Canada. Miles is from Blended Perspectives, the largest Atlassian solution provider in Canada. He has IT services and project management experience. He's also a certified Scrum Master. And he has a wide array of experience in both infrastructure and software development environments. So thank you for joining us, Miles. And last but not least, we have from overseas, or at least overseas for me, from Germany, Torben Schwennesen. Torben is from Demicon, another Atlassian solution provider, one of the largest in the German-speaking regions of Europe. He's a senior consultant who specializes in business strategy and digital transformation, and he's a certified Atlassian expert. He has an academic background and tons of experience in process and project management, and also finance, which is a little bit interesting combination, I think. So welcome, Torben. So here's the agenda for today. It's a very simple agenda. We're going to review the most popular options for project portfolio management in Jira. And let me qualify how we determine popular in this case. In this case, it's just a measure of what the Atlassian marketplace tells us in terms of total installations. So we're going to talk about the 4 most popular platforms for project portfolio management and give you our perspective on those. I'll start, and then I'll have our panelists comment as well. And the most important part of today's webinar is the audience Q&A. So as I mentioned a moment ago, as you think of questions, please just jot them down in the Q&A function. We'll queue them up and we'll answer them towards the end of the webinar. So what are these most popular solutions for project portfolio management in Jira? Well, according to the Atlassian marketplace, these are them. There are 4 of them, and I'll mention a 5th one in just a moment. Portfolio for Jira, which is an Atlassian product. AHA, which is from AHA Labs. Big Picture from Software Plant, and then our product, Structure for Jira, from ALM Works. These are the most popular. But we would be remiss if we didn't talk about one more. There's one on the horizon here that some of you, I'm sure, are aware of, also coming from Atlassian, called Jira Alliance. Atlassian recently acquired Agile Craft, and they've announced already to the world that they'll release a new product called Jira Alliance based on that acquisition. So let's look at each one of these in a little bit of detail. And what I'm going to do is give you my perspective on these solutions based on the conversations that I have with customers on-site visits and at trade shows. I talk with customers and Atlassian partners frequently. So this is just my perspective on these to get things going. So let's look at Jira. Let's look at Portfolio for Jira first. So Portfolio was born out of another Atlassian acquisition. In 2014, Atlassian acquired a company called Radiant Minds in Austria. And Radiant Minds had developed a popular Jira plugin, as they were called at the time. These days we call them applications or apps. But they had a product called Roadmaps. And Roadmaps was a very popular Jira plugin. Atlassian acquired that product and turned it into the product we today know as Portfolio for Jira. Not surprisingly, it's the most popular in terms of active installs. There are about roughly 10,000 active installs of Portfolio today across the Atlassian ecosystem. It's available on all of the Atlassian platforms, cloud, server, and data center. And what I hear most frequently from customers about Portfolio is that they like the way that it forces their Agile teams to adopt and embrace a particular hierarchy in the scheme of delivering delivering software in an Agile fashion. So they force you to embrace the epic story subtask hierarchy that most people are very familiar with. They also like the fact that it's good for planning. Most of the people I speak to use Portfolio for planning purposes. And that's what I hear most frequently about Portfolio. Next is, and the rest of these now are in just alphabetical order. So AHA from AHA Labs is a bit different than the rest of the products in today's discussion. AHA is a separate software as a service. It's a SaaS solution that essentially runs independently from your Jira server or Jira Cloud or Jira Data Center for that matter in the cloud, and it has a connector into those platforms. They supply you with the technology that you need to connect your Jira to AHA. And it works with an array of other products as well. So unlike the other applications we're discussing today, it does not run on top of Jira. It runs in this separate fashion, and you move data back and forth between AHA and Jira. Let's see, I think that the thing I hear most frequently about it, AHA is typically a product that's used by product managers, often in organizations that previously weren't using Jira, so they've already had AHA for some time. They bring Jira in and they decide to integrate Jira or AHA with their new Jira installation. And that seems to make sense for those organizations who've previously been using AHA. The one thing I'd point out is that AHA does not work with Data Center. It only works at this time with Jira Cloud and Jira Server. Next, let's talk about Big Picture. Big Picture is from a company called Software Plan. And it's been around for a while now. It's been around since 2014. And it is a quote unquote proper Jira application. It runs on top of Jira using the Atlassian APIs. And it's actually a collection of modules. They have a Gantt module. They have Big Picture itself. And then they have Big Picture Enterprise, which adds additional features that Software Plant feels are applicable to larger organizations. They support cloud, server, and data center. The thing I hear most frequently about what people like about Big Picture is that it's a very broad and deep product with many capabilities. I've heard some people describe it as the Jira version of Microsoft Project. And for folks who are used to using Microsoft Project and they want all of that deep and broad capability set, that's what people tend to like about Big Picture. And then there's Structure for Jira from ALM Works. That's our product. We've also been around for a long time. In fact, we're a little bit older than Big Picture. And we were developed around a ticket that was supported to Atlassian back in 2010, or actually 2009, by Mark Derricutt, who observed that the 3-level hierarchy that's standard in Jira that I mentioned a moment ago of epic, story, and subtask is not sufficient for many organizations, and it wasn't sufficient for his organization. And he wrote a ticket to Atlassian saying, please add the capability to have subtasks of subtasks, is the way he described it. And that was what prompted us to develop Structure. Structure, in fact, allows you to create essentially unlimited hierarchy in Jira and organize things to suit your project, however you manage projects. And that's what we hear most frequently about Structure, not surprisingly. That's what people like about Structure, is it's not prescriptive. It doesn't force you to do things a certain way. And it allows you to organize your projects however you like. That's the thing we hear most frequently. And then lastly, there's this forthcoming Jira Alliance solution from Atlassian. Now, some of the folks on the line today may know a bit more, in fact, certainly do know a bit more about Jira Align than I do, but they're also under non-disclosure, so they're gonna have to be careful about what they are able to tell you about Atlassian's plan specifically, but I'm sure they'll be happy to tell you what they're able to tell you. As we understand it, in its first release, Jira Align will be a lot like, or as I understand it, I should say, is going to be a lot like AHA, in that it is already a separate software as a service solution. In fact, if you look at the language that Atlassian's using for this product, they describe it as a service. And it will connect in some fashion to the various flavors of Jira. I think we have to assume it'll probably connect with all flavors of Jira, but it will be a cloud solution that runs in its own separate service environment that connects somehow with your Jira environment. Those details are TBD. I also think it's interesting to observe that Jira is largely used by very large organizations who are embracing large methodologies for scaling Agile, like SAFe as one example, or Scrum of Scrums. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt this product, if at all, for their smaller customers who aren't using those methodologies. So a lot of that is TBD. I think it's also will be interesting to watch to see whether or not there's any impact with the portfolio offering from Atlassian. In some respects, these products do overlap a little bit because they're both designed to help you with planning. So that's it. Those are the four most popular solutions today. I'm not excluding anything intentionally. So if there's a question out there in the audience about another platform that we didn't discuss in this part of the presentation, by all means ask questions and we can probably give you our insights for that product as well. But what I'd like to do now is involve our panel in the conversation and get them to comment on some of the things that I just highlighted. So we're going to start with Gary. Gary, I'm just going to remind you to unmute yourself before you try to answer. But as I mentioned earlier, Portfolio for Jira is one of the more popular apps. In fact, it's the most popular marketplace app, and it's from Atlassian. From your perspective, what do you think Portfolio's greatest strengths are?
I think for the majority of the clients and customers I work with, people tend to gravitate towards Portfolio, firstly because obviously it's a first-party product, so that gets people's attention because they like having products all from the same vendor. But also it's very effective at creating a sort of visualized backlog and a visualized roadmap of the work ahead. So, out of the box Jira, the backlog view is quite limited. And if you're a product manager or release manager, you often want to be able to visualize it and see everything in one place, and in order to do your kind of short to medium term planning. So Portfolio actually fits really neatly into that world. And it's not surprisingly, really, as you mentioned earlier, it's originally a product called Roadmap anyway, and that's what its strength is. Well, certainly its strength in version 2, because it's you didn't really mention, Dave, but Portfolio is in a bit of a funny state at the moment in that there's actually two flavors of Portfolio. If you acquire it for server and data center, you've still got version 2, which is the one that people have used it for a while, familiar with and comfortable with, and there's this new version 3, which is not quite functionally complete, and so you've got some features and not others, and you've got more of a Gantt view now, so it's less of a roadmap. So it's a bit, in that respect, it's a bit odd.
That's an interesting point, really, because in fact at Atlassian Summit in Las Vegas, Atlassian announced that on the cloud platform, Portfolio would cease to exist as a separate product, and its features would be blended into to Jira Cloud.
Yes, and there's obviously the new roadmap feature of the next gen projects in cloud, which I've actually been working with a customer over the last couple of weeks who's strictly Jira Cloud, and they were crushingly disappointed with that feature. And I sort of explained to them that it's still in development, and they're really trying to play catch up here, but it feels a bit early to be abandoning Portfolio and cloud without that full functionality being there for the next gen projects. And also, it's not really clear to me, again, some of the other panelists will probably have a better idea than myself on this one, but I've only had a couple of demos of Jira Align, and it's not really clear to me really how that's going to overlap and work either with Portfolio and cloud. So, but the interesting thing is that Portfolio on server and data center, they're releasing updates every 2 weeks at the moment. And in fact, I did a demonstration of Portfolio yesterday and noticed that a whole load of new features have been added just 2 days ago. So they're iterating quite hard on the server and data center products. So I still think there's a lot of life in Portfolio in that environment, particularly for data center moving forward. And it's rapidly becoming the new look and feel of it is rapidly sort of reaching the point that it needs to.
Great. All right, thanks, Gary. Miles, let's pose the next question to you, and I'll remind you as well to be sure to unmute yourself. One of the other popular platforms that we talked about was Big Picture. I know that Big Picture is popular in Canada. Maybe you could share your perspective on Big Picture.
Yes, hi there, everybody. Just a quick comment about planning in general, because it's the way we would come at an assessment of any of these third-party apps. Blended Perspectives is an independent firm. We actually don't build any third-party apps at all, so we come at this from a purely independent perspective. And the thing about planning is that planning tends to go with the type of organization you have and the type of planning that you want to do. Sometimes in planning terms, we see methodology blinkers. My planning approach, like SAFE, is better than yours. Obviously, any planning is better than others. In contrast to Portfolio, one of the attractions of Big Picture is that it has a flexible hierarchical planning approach. So obviously, one of the things about Structure, which is great, is that it's very flexible hierarchically. And from a planning perspective, if I have different planning styles, if I want one division, to have SAFE, if I want another division, to be sort of more lean, if I want to be more, waterfall oriented, for enterprises, I really need a flexible hierarchical structure. And that's exactly what Big Picture provides. Both Big Picture and Portfolio create a concept called a plan, which is a different kind of receptacle, if you like, than the Jira projects, the various boards and so forth that live underneath them. And the question then becomes, how well does the plan integrate with Jira and its subcomponents? And Big Picture is, as mentioned, very powerful. It has the ability to import into it and synchronize real time versions, projects, sprints, backlogs. So you can visualize these in a more waterfall style fashion. And in the end, although Agile is, on a purist basis, not particularly waterfall centric, we still want to see our versions. So it scales Agile across multiple projects very well. It's got a fantastic roll-up ability, so you can configure various metrics very nicely to the parent tasks. And it's got, very, nice, simple Microsoft project style interface. It also has linkages to resource planning with Tempo teams. It's got a very strong resource management approach. And that's what you'll see in that sort of the enterprise version. On the weaknesses side, you know, the power and capability of the product is a bit of a double-edged sword, because in some cases we see clients sort of recoil back, you know, in terms of what it can do. You're essentially configuring both what the plan will do and also the way that it consumes the data from the various Jira projects. You could, for instance, bring in the versions of multiple Jira projects, as well as, you know, their sprints, multiple backlogs. So you can imagine that that gets quite complex quite quickly. A method to overcome that is really to just start with simple artificial tasks, which it allows, and to show that, you know, you can really build a very simple plan, and you can always leave it in that fashion. In fact, the way it comes out of the box, they have this Rescue the Princess plan, which is kind of comical. It's said that it has a lack of explicit forecasting capability, but I believe that can be overcome by using artificial tasks and version and different plans. You can have multiple plans which consume the same Jira projects, so you can see what happens if you add artificial timelines. It also has a road mapping function. I've never been particularly clear about the value add of that particular application, given what is a very nice interface for planning purposes. So, you know, that's kind of my take in a quick sense. We've done some fairly detailed assessments of all these apps, as well as the statistics and growth paths. So if you're interested, we can follow up with you later. Great.
Thank you, Miles. Brandon, as I mentioned briefly, AHA is a bit different than the rest of the lineup here. Why don't you share with the audience your perspective on AHA?
Yep. Thanks, Dave. And you're right, it is a bit different. It really takes a different approach than the other PPM tools we've been talking about, since it's very product management focused. And so it tends to go upstream of where we traditionally look at the PPM work to be able to provide some structure to how teams provide and manage their product management lifecycle. And so that's really the key difference. Is it's very product management focused, and how you do that strategy and planning on the product side, and then that work would feed into Jira. And so the implication here is really, how does this, we still have to have an input into Jira and how it's configured to make sure that it helps support that.
In fact, do you hear any concerns from customers about the fact that it's not a Jira app in the traditional sense?
A couple years ago, we definitely would have heard that, but at this point, so many of the other tools that are integrating with Jira are not in Jira. And there is a very good integration between AHA and Jira that allows data to be pushed one way or bidirectional in between it. But that does, again, go back to what Jira is going to do with that data once you put it in. So you'll have to make sure that Jira is configured to support that. How are you going to plan and get that hierarchy view, like in something with structure, and how that would ultimately be managed inside of it.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, last but not least, or at least for this portion of the discussion, Torben, why don't you share your perspective on Structure, our product? I know Structure is very, very popular in Germany. It's our second largest market, and I know you have some insights there.
Hi Dave, thanks for the introduction. And I try to not to make too much marketing for Structure, but yes, you're right. Up front, I totally agree with Miles, Gary, and Brandon, what they told about the add-ons. There are so many things. So, well, many of our customers are looking for multi-project management solutions, but they do not want to introduce another software. That is what we see a lot. And then in most cases, Structure comes in with its versatility and flexibility. And that was also one reason why Structure is, for example, one part of our Atlassian Safe solution, where we are only using add-ons. Because as I said, people try to stay in the first moment within the Atlassian ecosystem. And that was the reason why Structure is, especially in this project management approach topic, one of the main add-ons we use there. So you ask about the strengths. There are definitely a lot, but I would say the main are you can use it for different use cases. And as we already have heard, to get a structured overview about your data. So if you use Jira more in a sense of data lake for your project management, it's a really cool way to get an overview there and get the status at a first glance, especially when it comes to a hierarchical view, because many people are familiar with the spreadsheet-like view. They already know it from Excel. This is where, especially in this digital transformation phase, where many customers are coming from. They are used to have this, you have lines below that, you can edit within the lines. That this is also possible with structure, so that's the reason why many customers are loving it. You can sum up values over linked issues. That's really cool. For example, like stories, or in this case of save, even for budgeting. So you can sum up over epics and the level above, for example, your budget which is planned, or the actual budget. So you can compare it directly within your hierarchical view. As I said, formula is of course another one thing, like the weighted short job first. This is really interesting because people are struggling in most cases. How can they prioritize work? And this is where weighted short job first could help. And structure gives you some kind of backlog for your next topics you can do there. Another one is, of course, you have structures compared next to each other. So you can have it and copy marked issues from one side to the other. So you do not have to use the bulk edit or the bulk copy. So this is a really cool function. And of course, there are so many things. When it comes to this, we really love structure.
All right. Thank you, Torben. Since you have your microphone already open, what are your thoughts about the Agile Craft acquisition and the forthcoming product Jira Align?
I think it was definitely a cool move because, as we already heard, Portfolio for Jira is a cool tool, but it's limited to smaller teams. When we come to enterprises, so we are having a lot of projects within the manufacturing area, and then Portfolio is limited due to the capacity we have already heard within the backlog, or due to the filtering function. So that means they needed something bigger, especially if they want to be competitive against CollabNet, CA Technologies target process. This is when you see to have a look at the Gartner report as well. So Agile Craft was definitely visionary. Atlassian has the market, and now you have a perfectly fit between these two other two companies. But it will be definitely it will need time because it feels still like another tool. So where the big advantage could be that they now integrated in total, so Jira and Align, and you just have the feeling that it is one tool at the end. And then it's not like having target process and Jira or having CollabNet and Jira. Then it really feels like one solution, and this could bring the big move within the market. Yes.
Okay. What about the other panelists? Miles, do you have any comments about Align?
Yes, yeah, I do. We have been we are an early release partner. There's only so many early release partners around. I think Cprime is one of them as well. But obviously we bring a North American spin to this. Where we understand Jira Align has been particularly successful is basically SAFe. In North America, SAFe has really taken off. It is, in some enterprises, the preeminent scaled agile framework. SAFe is a big methodology with capital letters. It does require almost, enterprise reorganization to achieve. Where Jira Align is very strong is in its overall reporting. It has fantastic sort of metrics for how the various teams, are delivering, the whole thing. It has numbers. So that's the other thing, when we say PPM, we have to be a bit mindful that all of these solutions suffer a little bit from not being as rich and quantitative as, say, some of the traditional PPMs out there that allow you to do the mathematics and the budgets and those sorts of things. So it's very much been successful in some quite large corporations, you know, and I would say that it's kind of a different way of looking at it. It's very much in some respects top down. There is some overlap between what it's doing as it consumes the information from, say, sprints, and it takes the information and it really turns it into predominantly a safe framework. That's not to say that it can't be used to consume information from other systems, but that's where we see Jira Align being particularly strong.
Okay. Gary or Brandon, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, similar to what Miles has said, we've actually seen a lot of interest in some of our larger customers that are already down that safe path, looking for ways to better manage the work, and Jira Align is a great option for that. And we found that our newly formed Jira Align practice, as a early release partner, also has really helped highlight the complexity of safe implementations, as well as what the tools need to be able to support over and above what we've traditionally seen with Jira and a lot of the add-ons.
Okay, great. Gary, anything?
Yeah, I was just going to add one other observation from a sort of non-functional point of view, is the fact that for very large enterprises, often the challenge they have is they will have multiple Jira instances within their business. So as well as having perhaps cloud offerings, they may have on-premise instances of things at Jira as well. And I think one of the advantages of having Jira Align almost, you know, architecturally as a separate application is your ability to bring all of that data together under one place. So you have this sort of, I think it's, you know, I've heard it described as a sort of air traffic control view of all your projects and programs. Whereas, as mentioned by the other panelists, the other add-ons we've been talking about are very much, you know, the kind of guy on the tarmac waving the things for the planes. You know, it's very much focused at that kind of lower level and orchestrating at that level. Whereas Align is, you know, further up. But it's a practical issue that lots of enterprises that certainly I've worked with over the last few years have, in that they have this issue of lots of different Jira instances floating around. So I can see Align being kept at that kind of architecturally separate layer, but they could do things to make it sort of more integrated in terms of the experience you get in cloud, for example, within the UI.
All right. At this point, we're getting some good questions from the audience too, so I'm going to mix in some of those questions. Brandon, I think this one's probably good for you, but others are welcome to comment as well. But in terms of methodologies and scaling Agile, what methodology sort of has the best tools for project portfolio management, or the best methodology for project portfolio management?
I think Miles started touching on that part. And if you asked me this question a few years ago, it wouldn't have been so clear. There was DAD, LESS, Nexus, Spotify model. But at this point, we've very clearly seen that SAFe is the chosen model for larger companies and companies looking to, you know, scale up even at the program level. So it's really been what most of our customers are asking for, and what we really need to help support. So it's been a very interesting time as both SAFe and the tooling around it has matured. And this is where we start seeing some of the split between, I'll say, traditional PPM tools and the need to support something like SAFe that is much more Agile focused. And so we do see some of those tools are really around traditional waterfall planning, whereas SAFe really focuses on a different approach to that planning, to financial management, to lean processes around it and how it needs to be supported.
Torben or Gary, do you see any differences in Europe? Would you agree that SAFe is becoming the most popular scaled Agile methodology in Europe as well?
Yes, definitely. So especially what we see it comes to scaling Agile or multi-project management in a collaborative way is this is definitely one of the biggest tasks we have to do with our customers, especially in this enterprise manufacturing area, when it comes to end-to-end traceability from requirement to test to bug to changes. And it's not only in the software development, so it's getting more and more on the hardware development and all this cross-functional. So this is where we see it's moving to. So I guess the most success is due to the fact that it gives you a detailed guideline compared to the others. So this is what especially the Germans or the Europeans like. If you have a guideline and a framework, it's easy to try to set it up. But in most cases, we see it's a safe, light approach they are going for, because they have difficulties in feeling committed to we all do safe now. What I can really recommend is from CollabNet version 1, they publish every year a State of Agile report, and there you can see it as well. So it's a 30-site report, and this gives you a really good overview about what is going on there in the market. But this is definitely what we see there. So at the end, it's more a safe light, but it's definitely always safe what we hear.
Okay, Gary, same thing in the UK?
Yeah, I would pretty much 100% agree. Certainly the thing that we find with our customers that are adopting SAFe or already have SAFe is that they do sometimes struggle around the automation and tooling side of things, and particularly in the Atlassian space, they'll reach out to partners like ourselves to assist. We often find they come up with some quite creative bespoke solutions. And often we will move them towards, the sorts of PPM solutions you've got here to help them do that. I must admit, I've never come across a full SAFe. I think, as Torben said, I think most of the SAFe implementations I've come across, it's been very much not a full commitment, but using SAFe within one area of the business, or using SAFe in terms of the basic framework, but then flexing it and using their own bespoke methodologies or having a blend also of Agile, waterfall, and lean within the business.
Okay. How about you, Miles? What are you seeing in North America, here in North America?
Well, yes, I mean, there's a lot of talk about SAFe, but I think the cautionary note with it is that it requires really, in most cases, an enterprise transformation to do it the way that it's supposed to be done. And the appetite for an enterprise transformation, for instance, to have epics at more of the, the larger scale levels, is very difficult to do. So it needs to be done not just with tools, but it needs to be done with, reorganization and processes. And so there's an awful lot, I would agree, with Gary about the hybrid nature of the implementations we've seen. The other cautionary note I want to make is this idea that there's just one way to scale. And I worry that scaling on a single node, if you want to call it like that, is a very limiting thing to do. And the reason I say it is because also Agile, to get the true benefits of Agile, what we want to do is see, improvement, at the team level, at the sprint level. We want to see continuous improvement there. Ways to scale can also be viewed as ways to see multiple teams and their performance. So perhaps, my view is still that planning applications at an enterprise level that are capable of supporting multiple planning modes and multiple hierarchies is definitely a very important paradigm. So even if you were to go with a line, you'd want to have one of these other apps that allow for planning with different methodologies to complement it.
Great. I have another question from the audience here. How are customers using structure to visualize interdependencies between work items? And Gary, that's something you and I talked about recently. Maybe you could comment on that first, since your mic is open.
Yeah, sure. So this is obviously something that comes up quite a lot. And you mentioned in your opening discussion about the various products that one of the limiting factors is essentially the epic story subtask or epic task subtask hierarchy that you get out of the box with Jira. And often I find particularly non-IT organizations struggle with those concepts. So for example, I've done a lot of work with a couple of legal firms fairly recently, where they are using Jira actually to model things like mergers and acquisitions and doing sort of very complex client work and sort of trying to use the very software orientated hierarchy that comes out of the box with Jira with things like Portfolio, which is what they were using originally. They're really struggling with, and actually we found that switching over to using Structure was quite a good move for them, because it it meant that we could have a very bespoke hierarchy as well as lots of complex interdependencies between the different items. So you imagine with if you're a large legal firm and you're handling a business merger, their sort of backlog of items was sort of several thousand, with lots of sort of overlapping dependencies between different tasks they'd have to do and region-specific things they'd have to do. So we were able to actually model that very successfully in Structure because of the dynamic nature, just using simple issue links and then having different views of the data in different structures. And that was when I first started working with them on that, it was a real eye-opener, I should say, because when they first presented me with the problem they had, and they just showed me these sort of 50 or 60 spreadsheets that they were trying to model in Jira, it was a complete nightmare. But, it is possible to do, and it's then easy to visualize using, basically we use the structure Gantt to actually sort of visualize that on 2 or 3 of the plans. So, I think that's a key benefit, particularly for those. I find personally that Structure is popular with our customers who are less tech savvy, if you see what I mean. They're more from sort of less non-IT related industries.
Okay. Brandon, would you agree, or do you see things slightly differently?
I would agree. As we really start looking at, how our customers approach those sorts of items, the usage of Structure and how it can visualize that item is very important, and it's tough to beat. There are very few things that can actually provide that sort of visibility into it, and it's a great tool for that sort of work.
Okay, we've got another question for the audience, and I think for the panel, that I think I'm just going to let whoever would like to respond to this respond. What's the best application for resource planning?
Depends on how we define resource planning. Tempo is obviously one of the biggest add-ons in the space here around that, and it can be a great tool for that. But resource planning means different things at different companies and how they manage that process and what they expect to get out of it. But Tempo is probably a good place to start.
Yeah.
How about you, Miles?
Yeah. So the thing about Tempo is that it has its own planning tool, right? Which I don't know. I can't remember where it fits in the number of downloads and so forth. But one way to look at resource planning is obviously you need to be able to plan at the team level. You need to be able to plan at the individual level. You need exceedances. You need to be able to schedule calendars. You need to be able to define work calendars. So how long, does this team work on a project every day of the week? So there's a lot of, reasonably sophisticated configuration to make sure that resource planning works. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, don't shoot the messenger here, but I don't think Structure for Jira is there yet with resource management. Big Picture certainly does have a full resource management module in it. It's quite powerful. And the difference, interestingly enough, between Big Picture and Portfolio for Jira is that Big Picture can integrate with Tempo teams. And so where Tempo, if you're a big Tempo user and you really like Tempo, the integration is quite powerful, whereas Portfolio for Jira has its own definition of teams, at least the last time I looked at it. So my view really would be at the moment, and I'm sure this will change, I know that Structure for Jira is coming along, that Big Picture would be the superior resource management tool, because you really need to be able to have an overlay of the plan of work onto the resources, and at what point will they become timed out, so that you're going to see, that you need either to add more resources or extend out the life of the project or the task.
So I will add one editorial comment. I wouldn't disagree with your observation, but we do have the structure.gantt plugin, and version 2 is going to be released very, very soon. Okay. And in version 2, we are adding resource planning.
Yay. That's great. I mean, and that's why I kind of commented, that I know that you guys are investing heavily in Structure for Jira. And I think what's interesting about Structure for Jira is that you already have such a large population of users that use Structure. That's going to be presumably going to be much easier for them to move into your world and grow with you than it would be to switch products. So I think it makes total sense.
All right, I have another question from the audience here about whether or not any of these tools are helpful in terms of doing forecasting and reporting on projects, in-flight projects. Torben, what are your thoughts?
Well, regarding forecasting and reporting, it's definitely one of the most asked questions or requests we're getting from customers, because at the end, people up the upper management want to have an overview, and there's this next to EasyBI is definitely one of the biggest tools we're using there. Structure is one of the used reporting tools we have. So especially when it comes to estimation or showing delivery dates, in many cases you can use Structure Gun for it to show something like, okay, what kinds of dates do we expect for having a delivery, or how can our project management roadmap can look like. As well, when it comes to Agile and Waterfall, you want to have an overview about this whole hybrid topic, and this is where we use the Structure Gantt a lot. So there we have this critical path or there's milestones, or you can combine as well different plans. So especially in bigger projects where, for example, you have modules combined to a car, for example, and you have a huge complexity and different models used in different products or vehicles at the end, then you can combine it. And what is really interesting there, I'm not sure if everybody has already seen it, that ALM Works just released a few days ago a new feature where you can do predictions with structure. And this is really cool because you get, based on the historical data, something like throughput or predictive velocity or something like delivery dates. And I just got this week a first glance at this, and I'm really looking forward, because this is definitely something that at the moment you're getting not by many tools. Portfolio for Jira is something like delivering a forecasted date when it could be solved. But this is especially combined with this resource planning, something really interesting, especially in this agile world where you have some velocities, and based on that, getting a kind of prediction if you can meet a due date. So I would say Structure and EDBI are these both add-ons are the most used add-ons when it comes to forecasting and reporting. Yeah.
So in the interest of getting through the rest of the questions, I'm going to just have one panelist comment per question, because we are running out of time. And for the audience, if any of you submit a question that we don't handle live, I promise we'll follow up with you directly after today's event. So the next question I have, and I'm going to direct this one to Brandon. Do any of the tools introduce new issue types? And specifically, are the things that can be used above the epic level to help organize my projects?
So do any of the product management tools you're talking about?
Yeah, any of the tools today that we've talked about, do they introduce any issue type above an epic?
Oh, yeah. Obviously, Portfolio for Jira does. Jira Align would as well. And, with those and how the teams define them, you will need a common way to be able to manage that. And that's where something like Structure does help to give you that visibility into it, as we do define them with different terms, different ways of looking at them, different parts of the organization. We'll need a way to be able to manage that, and I think Structure can do a great job of that.
Okay, great. Another question, and I'll give this one to Gary. We haven't directed many to you in the last few minutes. Can any of these products be used to manage and refine a product backlog?
Well, essentially, the ones that are fully integrated into Jira, so Big Picture, Structure, Portfolio, are very effective at doing that. Obviously, Portfolio, its very tight integration means that the plans you create in Portfolio can essentially behave like a consolidated backlog. And in fact, I found that product managers tend to like Portfolio for that, and that they can do their backlog refinement in one place and see the impact of it straight away. Structures also, but providing you set the structure up accordingly, using the templates or using the automation rules. You can also use to do consolidated backlog refinement. and can do that as you can in Portfolio across multiple projects as well. Big Picture is a little bit trickier to do, as I think Miles mentioned earlier, because the configuration of the plans in Big Picture is quite key. Essentially, if you're living in Big Picture, you're doing everything essentially from the Gantt. So the Gantt takes priority, but you could still treat that as a backlog view and do your backlog refinement from it. But it's probably a little bit more, I would suggest, a little bit more fiddly to do than it is in Portfolio and Structure.
Okay. I think we're out of time. We're coming up close to the top of the hour, so I'm going to end today's session and thank all of our participants, our panelists, and our audience. Thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate your time. As I mentioned, to those of you whose questions we did not get to, we will follow up with you directly, and I'll make our panelists aware of your questions as well in case they want to comment. And if anyone has anything at all, if they'd like to get in touch with one of our panelists or they think of a question after the fact, you can always send an email to webinars@almworks.com, and I will make sure we follow up on your questions. That's it for today. Thank you, everyone. We hope we see you again online sometime in the future.